Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here with you, Josie. It's great.
I read your book, Letters to Myself from the End of the World, a few years ago, and I've been following you on Instagram ever since. But I imagine that some of our viewers haven't heard of you before. So can you just provide us a quick introduction?
Sure. I am a wife. I am a mother of three. I'm an author of almost a dozen Catholic books at this point. I've been a writer much longer than I've been a wife or a mom. I married later in life, and then when we were planning to start a family, we were struggling with infertility, so we ended up adopting all three of our kids. And they are ages 6, 4, and 3 right now. So it's things are busy around here. There's not a lot of sleeping. But we live in Steubenville, Ohio, which is where both my husband and I went to grad school, and have a big old house in the ghetto that we're restoring when we're not chasing kids. Or he teaches theology, and I write.
And as mentioned, you are the author of many books. And I'll take this opportunity to mention that they will be on sale at the Rose Dinner Gala. So if any of our viewers are interested in any of these titles, they should make the plan to purchase them then. But they can also read one of your books right now. You have a free ebook titled A Catholic Answers 25 Questions About Abortion. So, what motivated you to write this book, and what has the reception to this book been?
After Dobbs, there was so much misinformation circulating about what Dobbs meant, about abortion, about how the church understands miscarriages and embryonic pregnancies. Like it was just so profoundly confusing. And I was answering the same questions for people over and over and over again. So in some ways, it was made to make my life easier. So whenever I had a question come up about abortion, I'd be like, "Here is a free ebooklet I wrote for you." But I also wanted it to be a resource for other people. Not everyone is comfortable answering questions about abortion or miscarriage or IVF or so many things that are deeply sensitive questions, and they involve theology and just pastoral care. So I wanted people to have a resource that when someone said to them, "Well, I heard the church thinks that in the case of an embryonic pregnancy, the woman should just be left to die." You're like, okay, let me give you this resource from a woman who knows what she's talking about. And I made it free for everyone because I want that information out there. I want people um, to have the answers that they need about the church's understanding of very complex issues at their fingertips. I didn't want to keep it behind a paywall. So that
And
was what, 2 years ago now.
just in case our viewers don't know what Dobbs is, can you just briefly explain? And also, how has that impacted the abortion debate in the United States?
Yes, so that is the case ruling that came down in the summer of 2022 in the United States from the Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade and sent the question of abortion back to the states. It didn't outlaw abortion, it didn't make it illegal, but it said this is a state's issue according to our Constitution, and that was. Although constitutionally, lots of people who were pro-choice have been saying for a while they thought that was probably the constitutionally better decision. It sent a lot of people into a panic. Even people who didn't realize that they were pro-choice, people would have been like, "Oh yeah, I think life is great. I think abortion is wrong." And then suddenly, when they realized, "Oh wait, if my daughter gets pregnant or if I get pregnant, I could be in a state where it says abortion is not okay." Suddenly their feelings about abortion changed a lot. So you had a large shift in the United States of people who would have said previously they were pro-life suddenly going, "Oh no, no, actually, I think abortion needs to be legal," when it became a real question that they had to have an opinion on. So there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of lies, just lies being spread, blatant lies about what would or would not be permitted in hospitals, what would or not be permitted in states. There was a lot of state legislation that came up. And so just incredible misinformation going around about those bills and what's possible. And just the medical, like how ethically you treat women who are in a place of crisis in their pregnancy where their health could be in danger or their life could be in danger. Just a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. And again, some of it malicious lies being spread. So I wanted to set that straight.
And that's one thing I really like about your approach is that you're not just preaching to the choir. You're speaking to pro-choicers, you're speaking to people who disagree with us and trying to find common ground and explain the pro-life position in a compassionate way.
One of the things that I did, so when my kids were really little, I was on social media more because I was feeding them and sitting down for long periods of time. Now they keep me running, so I can't be on as much. But at the time, I did a survey of people who followed me online who had previously been pro-choice and changed their mind to becoming pro-life, just to look at what had changed their mind. Why did they reverse their position? What made them more open to pro-life arguments? And it was a fascinating conversation that was very helpful for me before I wrote that book, because I could say, okay, these are the arguments that people are finding persuasive. These are the points that are hitting home for them. How do I craft these answers in such a way that someone who's not pro-life is reading this, but might open them up, even if it doesn't convince them, even if it doesn't sway them, it just helps them to understand a little bit where the pro-life position is coming from. And I think once you can start to do that, that opens up the room for conversation and dialogue. And without conversation and dialogue, it's very hard to change anyone's mind.
I agree. On the topic of IVF, though, that one's even more controversial. And I think part of the reason why it's so sensitive, even amongst pro-lifers, is because couples who pursue it are motivated by the very good and pure desire to have children. So, as you mentioned, you've struggled with infertility yourself. So, how do you go about broaching this topic with others?
It is an incredibly hard and incredibly sensitive topic. I think it's more sensitive than abortion for a lot of people because a lot of pro-life people are actually pro-IVF. A lot of pro-life people have undergone IVF because, again, it's a baby. Like babies are good. Babies are always good. And every baby that is born is created in the image of God and is beautiful and deserving of life and love and respect. And so it's hard when you're talking about IVF to separate the child who is good from the procedure, which is not good. And especially if you have gone through IVF and you have a child whom you love and adore that was created by IVF, it's hard to say, well, are you saying my child is bad? Like, how am I supposed to regret something that resulted in this beautiful child? How could you say my child will be angry at me someday about this? Like, so deeply personal because it's a living child who you're looking at and who you love. For my husband and me, there was a time at the height of our struggle with infertility. And infertility is one of the most painful things a woman can go through. You're like, my whole body is designed to bear a baby. This is what I've wanted to do my entire life. Like, what is wrong with me? Is God punishing me? Is God saying I don't deserve to be a mother, that I'm not worthy to be a mother? You just feel failed. You feel by God, you feel failed by your body. And at the lowest point in our infertility, I can remember kneeling. We'd gone to a shrine in New York, and I was praying for a baby, like I always was praying. And I was so angry that I understood the church's teachings against IVF as well as I did, because I've spent 20 years writing uh, about a Catholic understanding of the body and the human person and sexuality. So these are issues I'd studied intensely and written about intensely. And I wished I hadn't. I wished I was ignorant in that moment because I just wanted a baby and I would have done anything to have a baby. And I was like, oh, if I could only erase 20 years of theological knowledge, it would be so much better. Obviously, I changed, I do agree with the problems with IVF. But in that moment, in the emotional grief and this crushing, spirit crushing cross, I am very sympathetic to couples who choose IVF because if you can study like why the problems with IVF and the ethical complications and the theological complications for 20 years and still be tempted to do IVF, it's a tough ask for a lot of people to say no to a baby when that's what you want desperately. And so I always try to approach conversations about IVF from a place of deep compassion and understanding and love, because I 100% get the motivations behind it, know the motivations 99% of the time are good, but they're also complicated and you have to unpack a lot when you're talking about IVF. So, yeah, I think just approaching the conversation with nuance, and you can talk about the embryos who are frozen, the embryos who are discarded. But for me, I think it always comes back to the rights of the child. Like every child has a right to be conceived in love by a woman and a man who intend to raise that child together for the rest of their life. That is an inherent right of every child, and that right is violated by through rape. When a child is conceived through rape, that child's rights have been violated. That child's rights are violated if it's a one night stand or surrogacy, and its rights are violated through IVF. And so, no matter how much you love your child, you know, you violated your child's rights to be conceived in an act of love and not in an act of science or an act of love, there's always masturbation involved in IVF, so that's a problem. But I was talking once to a mom who had conceived her son through IVF, and she loved him so much, and he was the only embryo who was healthy. So that people say, well, there's only one embryo, but there were unhealthy embryos that were discarded. But even she kept talking about how when her baby, the embryo was in storage at the IVF facility, she's like, I couldn't stand the thought of him being there. Like I wanted to go visit him. I wanted to sit with him. I wanted to be with my baby. Like there's this natural instinct that women feel when they're going through IVF, going, okay, I know this isn't natural. I know pumping my body with hormones is not natural. I know my husband masturbating to pornography is not natural. I know my child being in a storage facility while they're getting big enough to, transplant into me is not natural. Like there is a violation of the natural process there. And it's tough to admit, but I think everyone can see it as long as you're not. But then it gets so wrapped up with the good of the child. So it's so complicated. It's so complicated. But my heart goes out to everyone who's facing infertility and feels like that is their only choice, which it's not. There's so many other options. The modern medical system, it's like a go-to. They're like, let's just do IVF instead of looking at the root causes of infertility, which is another problem in the healthcare system. Women's bodies are not taken seriously. Like they're always looking to override the way our body's meant to function. And whether it's giving us the pill to stop fertility or doing IVF when we won't have babies, a real injustice is being perpetrated against women in the medical system. And that's something that's not talked about enough in the conversation with IVF.
And I really want to emphasize that you don't just talk the talk, you also walk the walk. You ended up adopting three children. So, for those who don't have this firsthand experience, what is that process of adoption like?
It's stressful and hard and mildly traumatic, depending on the situation you find yourself in. It is not is to go back to infertility, people often think there's an easy fix and people hurt when they see a friend or a sister or a brother or a child going through infertility and they just want to fix it. So they'll be like, well, why don't you just adopt? Or why don't you do IVF? Or maybe you should just relax or give up gluten. Like everybody has an easy fix. And there's nothing about solving the problem of infertility that is easy. And adoption, it's not an easy fix for infertility. It is its own thing. It's really a path to which you're called. I think infertility is often an invitation to consider that path. I think every couple who's struggling with infertility should look at that option and putting it before God. But not everyone's going to be called to it. It's not for everybody. And it's a tough path to walk. Like it's not an easy way to get a baby. You have your own type of pregnancy. You have your own type of labor and delivery. Because, what you're being called to is to love both a woman and a child. It's not just welcoming a child into your home. It's loving this woman who is going through a crisis pregnancy and doesn't feel capable of parenting, and serving her throughout the pregnancy. Obviously you're trying to keep the baby healthy and give the woman what she needs for the baby to be healthy. But she may not choose to place. She always has the option to choose not to place her child. And you have to love her through that process, regardless of what she's choosing. Like you are there to support her and encourage her. And if she decides that placing the child is the best decision for both her and the baby, then then you welcome the child. But it's a twofold process. And we walked through it 3 times. It was very, very fast. We adopted 3 babies in 2.5 years. 2 of our kids are biological siblings. And I always tell people, I don't feel like I got a lesser form of motherhood. This was not plan B. Like this was always God's plan for our family. He always knew that these women would not be able to parent. And he, in his perfect providence, arranged our lives so that they would intersect and we would be able to parent these children. I don't feel like I've missed out on anything with pregnancy or labor. Like my friends who've given birth many, many times are like, nope, you had it way worse. That was way harder than any labor. I think, the punishment of Eve I've paid in full through our adoption, our journeys with our children. And I would do it 100 times over again. I would do anything I needed to do to be the mother to these three children. I've come to the point, and I came there several years ago, where I am just profoundly grateful for infertility. I am so glad that I was not able to conceive children of my own because that meant I could be there to be the mother to these three children. And not being their mother, not knowing them, is the saddest thought I can think of. I give thanks every day to God that I get to be their mother. I tell them every day how blessed I am to get to be their mother. And yeah, people often say with adoption, like, oh, they're so lucky to be with you. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, I'm so lucky to be with them. And yeah, I love talking about adoption and adoption education because it is a much more complex thing than most people think. But it is a beautiful thing. And, as Catholics, we believe that we are all God's adopted children, like we're all adopted by human grace. And so to be an adoptive family is to get to image to the world like that beautiful relationship that we have with God and grace, where we are completely His and my kids are completely mine. You'll often hear people say, well, I don't think I want to raise someone's kids who aren't my own, or my husband wants to only raise our own kids. And I was like, do you think I'm like raising somebody else's? Like, I'm raising my children. Like, my children are very much my own, just like we are very much God's own. So
Thank you for your honesty. So our theme for the National March for Life this year, as we just announced, is protection at conception. What does this theme mean to you?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of the rights of a child. It's not just about the right to life. It's a right to dignity. It's a right to having every moment of your life respected. And so I think broadening the conversation to include things like surrogacy and IVF is important because those children's rights are being violated at the moment of their conception. Often not without, people don't necessarily realize it. They're not thinking that way. No one's ever put it to them in those terms. But having a child conceived through surrogacy, where they're never going to know, necessarily their biological mother, they're never going to know the woman who carried them. They're being ripped from that woman, planned ripped, like not, with adoption where it's a tragedy and it has to happen for various reasons. But like the child's created with the intention of never being with the person in whose womb they grew. That is a violation of their rights, and that child needs to be protected from conception. Women need to be protected from exploitation, but that's a whole different conversation. So I think it's affirming that every single child has a right to life, has a right to be respected, has a right to be conceived in love. And affirming that, I think, broadens the conversation to where we are creating a culture where life really can be respected from the moment of conception to the moment of death.
Thank you so much, Emily. I look forward to meeting you in person on May 8th at the National March for Life Rose Dinner Gala.
I'm so excited. We'll be there with all the kids. They're all coming. So, well, they will probably be in bed, but we'll be at the March for Life.
And if you would like to hear Emily Stimpson Chapman's keynote at the National March for Life Rose Dinner Gala, please plan to buy your tickets as soon as possible.